How's it going, you guys? I hope y'all are doing fantastic today. I want to make a quick video talking about multivitamins and vitamin mineral supplementation in general and whether they can be beneficial or not, or if it's a waste of money. So, this is extremely complicated and nuanced topic, and it's hard to make universal recommendations across the board. Number one, the main thing is if you are deficient in a vitamin or a mineral, and I mean a clinical deficiency, okay, you're better off supplementing that vitamin and mineral than going a long time being deficient, because depending on the vitamin or mineral in question, there can be extreme short-term and or long-term consequences, sometimes ending up in coma or death, okay? And so, or, even things like brain damage and things in terms of vitamin B12 deficiency, for example. Things like anemia. These things all can be extremely deadly, okay? And both in the short term and the long term, they can cause permanent damage. So if you're one of those people who, are super against supplementing vitamins and minerals, it shouldn't just be good or bad. Some people are better off supplementing, okay? If you're deficient, you should be supplementing. However, it's also important to understand that the recommended daily intake of nutrients, okay, is based on weak science, okay? There's not any solidified randomized controlled trials that, for one, could go on long enough to determine causation, and for two, that have tested directly, someone who's eating a diet of whole foods that is eating enough animal foods for the fat-soluble nutrients and the active forms of many nutrients that you can't get from plants. You can only get precursors. But someone's eating a whole foods diet that it has adequate nutrition, or even it doesn't have adequate nutrition, might be lacking in certain nutrients like B vitamins, which typically are said to be mostly involved in energy metabolism regarding carbohydrates and fats. So if you're eating a whole food diet, okay, and you're not eating refined foods, there's a question on whether you need to supplement or not, depending on the composition of the diet. And the reason why is, like I was trying to say, there's no long-term trials that show without refined foods or some sort of famine, you'll end up with a deficiency of an essential nutrient that actually matters, okay? What I mean by that is most of the studies done on essential vitamins and minerals, they were done on test tube studies where people are basically, they're unconscious in a hospital bed and they're being fed through a test tube, right? And so they're being fed this like Soylent Green type of slop, like isolated vitamins, isolated proteins and carbs, right? They're being fed like whey protein, sugar, and a multivitamin solution through a test tube, right? Or through a feeding tube. So if that's the case, obviously you're going to be deficient in many nutrients that you would not be deficient in if you were eating, a whole food diet, okay? Especially one that contains a lot of red meat, in my opinion. And so the question is, are these vitamins and minerals conditionally essential, or are they always essential? And the thing is, there's no long-term dietary intervention trials that actually test this directly, and it's probably impossible to conduct such a study, which is one of the reasons why things like heart disease and the cause of heart disease is debatable, because you can't really conduct a long-term intervention trial of that nature. So we have to rely on cohort studies and things like that. And so we see people who are eating, all red meat diets, for example, with absolutely no plant foods. They don't develop scurvy, and most of them on paper would be considered deficient in vitamin B1 and folate and possibly manganese and other nutrients, but yet they don't actually show up with signs of clinical deficiency. And so because most of the studies on certain nutrients are, essential nutrients, they're done on nutrient deprived circumstances, feeding tube studies. There was one where this guy was, he went on a triple steamed all vegetable diet with nothing else, and that was used to determine a B vitamin deficiency symptoms. And it's like the guy wasn't eating anything but triple steamed vegetables. And so that's not just testing B vitamin deficiency, that's testing protein deficiency, energy deficiency, too low of a caloric deficit or too high of a caloric deficit. That's testing a widespread amounts of vitamins and nutrients when you're just eating a diet of triple steamed cruciferous vegetables like he was. But yet that was the evidence that the entire disease, the deficiency state of beriberi is based on. So really, really weak. And things like scurvy, where sailors were out on sea eating nothing but processed salt pork, and I believe like grains, like refined grains or something like that. And they developed scurvy after a long trip, and I believe they were resorting to drinking seawater as well, and so they didn't have any fresh water. And so they found that there's an ascorbic factor found in limes that will cure the disease in one group of sailors, but there's another group of sailors who were fed fresh meat and they actually reversed vitamin C deficiency. So you don't really hear much about that for some reason. But then you've got to ask yourself the question, like, the amount of fresh meat that they were eating was maybe gave them, 1% of your recommended intake of vitamin C, but yet it reversed scurvy. So these are all great examples of how weak the science is behind recommended daily intake of nutrients. And almost always in these studies, it's not a matter of, these nutrients are essential, and if you don't eat them, you'll develop a deficiency, no matter what type of diet you're eating. It's more along the lines of, this man was fed Soylent Green through a feeding tube, and they gave him soybean oil as his main fat source, and he developed a sickness, and they cured the sickness by feeding him fish oil to counteract the effects of soybean oil. And thus the omega-3 ratio, omega-3 omega-6 ratio was born. So that's legitimately where a lot of these recommendations come from. And then they take that as a foundation and they use cohort studies, population studies, mechanistic data, which all of those are just reinforcing the original foundation, but none of them can be used as evidence for causation themselves. And pretty much none of this can, but it is common practice because that's all we have to base our recommendations on. Meanwhile, you have all these people who are living examples of, the possibility that these things are not accurate. So, so do I think that we should supplement with vitamins and minerals? Look, if you think that that's going to help you, for example, if you're on a low carb diet or a ketogenic diet and you start to notice you have fatigue and muscle cramps, well, that's a symptom of a mineral deficiency. And it's well established that when your insulin levels are kept chronically low, you will be excreting a lot of water. And electrolytes will come along with them. And so that means you're probably going to need a supplement with electrolytes, right? Or you could wait it out and see if it gets better. But if you die of arrhythmia in that process, that won't be very, very good. Okay. But somebody who's eating a whole foods diet, high in carbs and, things like that, they probably won't need those mineral supplements, right? Somebody who is eating a vegan diet, for example, if they don't supplement with B12, oftentimes they developed all sorts of neurological symptoms that are very telling of B12 deficiency. Then they inject themselves with B12, and lo and behold, the symptoms go away. Okay, so of course there are some very clear indications requiring certain vitamin and mineral supplementation, you guys. But I think the main problem that a lot of people run into, that I ran into myself, and it's the main reason why I make a lot of videos like this, is when you start on this path of trying to be healthy, there is so much overcomplication of, what healthy eating actually is and the nutrients that you need to survive and all this. And a lot of this information is used to sell supplements, you guys. You know how much money I used to spend on super green food powders and superfoods and herbs and vitamins and minerals? When I first started this journey, especially when I had health problems, I spent my whole paycheck. I hardly had enough money for food. And back then it was even worse because I was scared to eat anything but organic grass-fed food, okay? Everything I ate had to be top dollar. So I hardly ate many calories, and I was spending all my money on these vitamin and mineral supplements, and I was suffering, and I kept thinking my suffering meant I needed more vitamin and mineral supplements, when all along I just needed more calories and more high quality protein, really. Although I did have more complicated problems than that. But the thing is, it's very easy to spend your whole paycheck on vitamins and minerals and not get anywhere. And for years, you'll be on this, you'll be a rat in a spinning wheel chasing this nirvana of health that doesn't exist. And you think the answer lies in some kind of magic mineral or vitamin deficiency. And you got this wheel of hypochondria. And at the end of the day, when you see that there's this group of people eating nothing but red meat, and they're probably deficient in all those vitamins and minerals I mentioned before, and they're feeling better and healthier than ever, then you start to feel kind of like you should probably start to question how accurate a lot of these scientific recommendations actually are and how scientific they are, right? So there's all these people who track their food with chronometer, which I'm a really big fan of. I think it's very important. And, you try really hard to eat enough green vegetables to get the vitamin C, magnesium, and carotenoids you need. You try really hard to eat enough, carrots to get the carotenoids and vitamin A you need or something. You try to use as much plant food as you can to get enough fiber. You try to eat, enough meat or legumes or whatever to get enough protein and these other things, right? And you try really, really hard to reach this recommended daily intake of vitamins and minerals. Eating a diet of only whole foods, because only whole foods are going to actually contribute towards that vitamin and mineral intake. And when you're eating whole foods, it's very hard to even get enough calories because of how filling they are, let alone enough volume of food to get your daily intake of vitamin and minerals. And every day is a struggle to get those 100% daily intake. Then you realize, you hear someone like me who states the facts that the RDI is not based on solid evidence, solid proof, and you don't actually have to strive to get 100% of your RDI every day. In fact, you shouldn't really have to worry about it depending on the type of diet you're on. Now for me, the type of diet I'm on, I know will not cause deficiencies because I see so many people doing that same diet and not developing those deficiencies. Now, I'm saying you shouldn't obsess over it. And if you feel like you need to take a multivitamin to reach that, then go ahead. There's a lot of people who claim they feel better when they supplement with a multivitamin. A lot of these vitamin and mineral supplements that are in these multivitamins, the forms that are in them are either, they're usually the cheapest forms, they're not bioavailable, For example, vitamin B12, cyanobolin versus methylcobalamin. One is a precursor to B12 that is harder to convert. The other one is a direct form with the methyl donor already in it. And so most multivitamins don't have the methylated versions of these vitamins. And so for many people, they may be useless, especially if you have genetic polymorphism, MTFR genetic mutation. So if you're one of those people, you won't be able to convert those, cyanobolin and these other vitamins and minerals unless you take the methylated form or you take extra methyl donors on the side. So the forms in these multivitamins are cheap, inefficient, and it's a questionable as if, is it a placebo? Is it even working? Do you even feel anything? Are you just wasting your money? The big thing is most people don't need an entire multivitamin supplement. They just need specific vitamins and minerals depending on the diet they choose, which they'd probably benefit even more if they just consumed those specific vitamins and minerals. And the other thing is, so we know that mechanistically, pretty much every single vitamin and mineral that you'll find in a vitamin and mineral supplement competes with each other for absorption and have complete opposite effects, metabolic effects in the body when you consume it. Good example of that is, there's synergy between these, a lot of these. So good example is, so you have vitamin D, vitamin D3, and then you have calcium, magnesium, vitamin K2, vitamin A, okay? So for the most part, it's generally agreed upon that vitamin A helps to calcify or decalcify soft tissues. It regulates the in and out of calcium in the soft tissues. Whereas vitamin D tends to regulate the in and out of calcium from harder tissues. And vitamin K2 is supposed to regulate the metabolism of calcium throughout the entire body. Whereas magnesium is heavily reliant on regulation of calcium metabolism as well. And so I might have gotten some of that wrong, but essentially they all work together for calcium metabolism. And if you are deficient in one, or if you take too much of one in relation to the other, then you might have overcalcification in certain areas of your body. And so it doesn't mean you should obsess over your vitamin A to vitamin D to calcium ratio. What that means is supplementing with vitamins and minerals might have a improper balance. And typically, a good balance of these vitamins and minerals, first of all, the forms are found in food. The body tends to excrete any overconsumption of a vitamin and mineral, and so, from food. And so you don't really have to worry about overconsumption as much as underconsumption. That's the case for omega-3 as well. A lot of people worry too much about, my ratio to omega-6. Look, as long as you don't eat high omega-6 vegetable oils and things like that, all you got to worry about is getting adequate amounts of EPA, DHA, and DPA omega-3s, okay? And arachidonic acid, although that's a more complex topic. Vitamin D, vitamin A, and these types of things, if you get them from foods, it's less likely to be problematic, unless you're eating extreme amounts of polar bear liver, which was one of the only documented cases of toxicity from liver consumption. So, that probably explains why so many, there's a lot of mixed evidence as far as benefits versus negative effects from vitamin and mineral supplementation, okay? You have lots of large studies showing amazing, or not amazing, but significant, statistically significant benefits from vitamin and mineral supplementation of various kinds. But then you also have large studies showing, increased rates of lung cancer and things of that nature from vitamin and mineral supplementation. And so, of course, these are generally population studies. These are generally cohort studies as well. And so these are more correlation than causation. But when you have these mixed results, you've got to really question whether these supplemental vitamins and minerals are beneficial at all, or if it's these other factors that are involved in some of these effects. And so I think the reason why you have these mixed results is because, number one, the requirements for vitamins and minerals depends on the person. And number two, unless you're deficient in a vitamin or a mineral, when you take these vitamins and minerals, right, in some supplemental form, you could very well be throwing off the balance of synergy from other vitamins and minerals. Okay? So it's all context dependent. It's one of the reasons why tracking things in chronometer is important, and doing lab testing is important. The other thing is that most vitamins and minerals, so we only know about 100, 200 essential nutrients that we found in the last 200 years. But I guarantee you, I mean, science is showing, every year there's hundreds and hundreds of new compounds being found in plants and animal foods and animal tissues. We haven't even began to discover probably 10% of the molecules in plants and animals and foods. Okay, so if we've only discovered 5% of the nutrients in these foods and things we consume, then it's pretty arrogant to assume that we've uncovered everything there is to know about essential vitamins and minerals. And it's very possible that some of these diseases that we are facing in modern society are caused by a deficiency that we have yet to identify. That's very, very possible. That's one of the reasons why following any kind of extreme diet in a long term could possibly be dangerous. Now, this is coming from someone who eats pretty much only red meat and has been for over a year now, but there are people who have done it for over 50 years, but still, okay, I can still admit the fact that there could be things we're missing in the diet that we're not aware of, okay? And so supplementing with a vitamin and mineral supplement without these, unknown compounds, hypothetically speaking, could easily cause, a condition or a disease that we just haven't discovered would happen from that, And I think that very much so is the case with everything in nutrition science, is that, when you just assume everyone should take a multivitamin, or when you just assume, it's been well studied that saturated fat causes heart disease through increase in LDL cholesterol, or even something like, sugar and vegetable oils increase inflammation in the body that leads to heart disease. When you talk in absolutes, it really does a disservice to science, because it's more about asking more questions. It's okay to have an opinion or a hypothesis, but you got to understand we don't have even 5 to 10% of the evidence that we will have in the next 20 to 100 years, especially in regards to vitamin and mineral intake. So best thing we can do is look at people who are eating successful diets and what type of supplementation do they need, and is the supplementation doing them more benefit or harm, and use that as a guideline or as a general blueprint, and then use the science to try to help you understand why it's working or what might be missing. And then if you feel like you're missing something, try supplementing, especially if you have a blood test that shows that is so. And the other thing is, if you feel better when you supplement with a vitamin or a mineral, then that's all that matters, as long as you're not throwing something else out of whack. Because oftentimes people supplement with calcium, for example, in the long term, then they die of heart failure. And I believe that can happen because excessive consumption of calcium supplementation seems to calcify the arteries. And it's very, very, very plausible. Or, people who go on a vegan diet, for example, and they reverse their diabetes, and they feel so good, and they feel like they feel better than ever in their life, but then they lose excessive amounts of weight, and they start looking extremely anorexic, or they reverse diabetes or whatever, but they don't supplement with vitamin B12, and they're feeling good, and then they develop some kind of neurodegenerative disease or neurological symptoms, and that does happen to a lot of people. In that case, feeling good feeling good was not an indication of whether you're missing something or not. Okay. But, if you're on a low-carb diet or something, and then you supplement with magnesium and you feel better, then so be it. If you have insomnia and you're just following whatever diet, but if you have insomnia and you supplement magnesium and it cures your sleep disorder and helps you sleep, then great, And there's a lot of science that can back up a lot of these things too. But when you use, science and some of the evidence, like, oh, this person on a feeding tube, he developed a severe illness and omega-3 cured it. That means omega-3 must be essential for survival. So that means everyone needs to eat this much omega-3 in their diet to achieve optimal health. Like, now you're using science in a twisted and weird way, and it doesn't add up in reality. It really doesn't. So, where people mess up on is they use scientific evidence as to try to create recommendations. Like, oh, this trial said this, therefore you should eat this much and you should eat that. But it makes more sense to look at hundreds of years of a certain population eating a certain way and getting a certain result, and then using the science to determine some of the help to understand the results people are getting. Now, I think that this is kind of like the direction that we should be going in, is observing anecdotes, using science to back it up, and then using both science and anecdotes to determine some of the deficiencies and other problems that people might get or might be having. Because a lot of times you never know if you have a deficiency or a problem until it's too late. And so in that sense, it's not good to just entirely rely on observation. So I'll end this video with saying this, that, basically, I'll end it with saying this. Look, a large amount of what medicine and, medical advice is based on, okay? And that's different from nutrition, but it's clinical experience, you guys. It's clinical observation. And I can't even begin to explain how many doctors have, treated me with medications and things based on their observations rather than what they learn in medical school. Beyond that, what you learn in medical school is, largely limited. Let's put it that way, okay? It's very, very limited to the basics of what they need for that profession. And in medicine, it's diagnosing medical problems and treating it with surgery and pharmaceuticals. Okay, that really is medicine, and it's a great thing. But a lot of the most effective things, or a lot of the things that actually work, they're not things that you learn in school a lot of the time, right? There's a lot of things out there that people do, that people have been doing long before, the science was ever there, and it turns out to be scientifically validated. There's a lot of things that people have been doing for years that has worked, but it's completely the opposite of what the science claims. And so, if you want to be effective, you will learn how to interpret scientific evidence, but take it all with a grain of salt. And you will learn how to interpret people's experiences, but also kind of be skeptical at the same time, okay? And I think there's a fine line between skepticism and arrogance, because a lot of skepticism is wow, there's no way my college professor said that's nonsense, blah, blah, blah. It's whoa, anyway, be skeptical, but, appreciate all forms of evidence and use them together. Anyway, the big thing here is, as far as vitamins and minerals and the RDI and things like that, I'm telling you right now, all of these recommendations that are given from government agencies on these things, extremely weak, based on like just the most hilarious, types of studies, if you want to call a lot of it that. And if I'm wrong, please post me some clinical trials or some of the best evidence that you can find that proves me otherwise. Because I don't even see the point in someone commenting on these videos just to tell me something negative, like call me a name or something. Like, that doesn't benefit anyone besides your ego. Leave your comments down below.